Time to dig in on the legislative session, which begins next week. Been looking forward to this for some time now. We got Jason DeCuir from Advances Consulting on the hotline. How are you, sir?
Well, the question is, how are you, Big B, man? I tuned in yesterday, and I was thinking, who is that filling in for Brian? And then I realized, oh, snap, that is Brian, man. Hopefully you're coming back, though, man. You sound a lot better than yesterday.
I greatly appreciate that. Yeah, yesterday was struggle bus, to be sure. If you really want to make fun of me, go to talk1073.com, pull up the interview with Scott Burns. And there were times where, and it was this segment yesterday, it was 24 hours ago exactly, where I would open my mouth and literally nothing would escape. It was the most bizarre thing. So,
well, I gotta, we both love sports. Sometimes you gotta play when you're injured, right?
Right.
And you fought through it like a champ, bro.
It's like James Caan said to Darnell Jefferson. I used a real name and a character name in the program. He says, "Are you injured or are you hurt?"
Yeah, that's right. Probably both.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh man. All right, we got a session starting on Monday. We're going to be a lot more hyper focused and directed as this segment wears on throughout the process. But I like to start off very open ended and just pick your brain. What are you looking at to begin with?
Well, obviously, Brian, as you know, and most of your listeners, our domain is tax, and we're going to be following and tracking all of the continuation of tax reform, if you will, and it just being a fiscal session and hundreds of tax bills being filed and sorting through those and trying to find kind of like kind bills and those that would be good for business and industry and those that obviously would not be so good. But we're going to be tracking every single one of the tax bills, plus potentially another shot or another rerun of what was known as CA2. And there's a couple options they're looking at that. But, if you're just asking me even bigger picture than that, I was listening to some of your show this morning, man, there are just some enormous issues that the legislature is going to have to deal with. And I know I'm not saying this because we're in another session, but I mean, when you're talking, insurance reform has to be dealt with, the fallout of CA2, not passing. You've also got the reformation of DOTD and what's going to happen with that and all the studies. And we know how big and important that agency is. So there is going to be a lot going on this session, and I fully expect insurance reform to probably take center stage, and the tax stuff will be going on simultaneously.
We're talking with Jason DeCuir from Advances Consulting about the upcoming legislative session. All right, before we dive into any of the tax bills that are going to garner some headlines, I do want to start with, how do you make up ground from the failure of CA2? Because there was a lot riding on that, Jason. There was teachers' raises on that, doubling for senior citizens.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
But and not to mention all the different taxing things within not taxing, but cutting, which you could do within the state government. If it had passed, we've been able to manage our budget so much easier.
Yeah.
But it came up short of the polls. A lot of folks say it was because it was just too all encompassing. I disagree with that, but let's assume that position. If that were too all encompassing, how can they go back during this session? I should say, can they go back during this session and take individual bites at the apple so that we can see some results?
Yeah, good question, Brian, and a lot to unpack there. I guess first, and I'm not going to get into all the reasons it may have failed. I'll let some of the political pundits handle that. But look, we know there was more than just CA2 on the ballot.
Oh yeah.
There was items dealing with criminal justice and other things, and from kind of the outside looking in, it just appeared that even some of the other amendments caused a lot of opposition, and the opposition was just vote against all four. So how much of that vote against all four was directly related at CA2.
Right.
It's hard to decipher. However, I agree with you that there were people saying that there was too much in there, and we didn't understand it all. But look, Brian, you and I both know this is not easy stuff to understand. And if you really parsed it out and broke up, let's say, a complicated subject like the inventory tax, or some of the other consolidation of budget funds, would people have understood it that much more? I don't know. And I mean, it just requires research and doing some of your own independent research and looking at what the legislature is trying to do and how this can move the state forward. But one of the things I'll mention is that as soon as that amendment did not pass Saturday night, my phone started blowing up, and there were some myths out there. One of the things was most people thought that the larger part of the tax reform package that was passed would not go into effect. They thought they blew up the entire tax reform package. Well, that's not true. Many of the pieces of what was known as tax reform went into effect as January 1st of this year, right?
Yeah.
So, people are having less withheld from their personal income checks. Corporate income tax rates went down. Personal income tax rates went down. The sales tax rate did go up. The franchise tax, although not eliminated yet, because it doesn't get eliminated until January of 2026, but didn't require a constitutional amendment, and that is going to be phased out. The only real substantive tax piece of the package that required a constitutional amendment was the ability for local governments to phase out or have the option to phase out the inventory tax. That is the big piece that is still unresolved. And we also know there's a credit component of this piece, because businesses pay the tax to local government, they turn around and ask for a credit back. Very complicated, unnecessary scheme. And the credit is set to expire. So I think going into this session, there's going to be conversations about how can we still look at phasing out the inventory tax and subsequently not needing the credit. And we are already seeing new constitutional amendments being filed to address the inventory tax. But it appears that they're going to have a couple of options going forward, and I do think they're going to revisit the non-passage of CA2. Chairman Julie Emerson has filed basically a repeat of Article 7 rewrite with just a couple of minor changes. One of the big pieces of opposition directly related to CA2 was the fact that a lot of the nonprofits did not like their exemption being moved from the Constitution to statute. It wasn't being taken away. It just didn't like that it was going to be moved. And it brought both conservatives and the other side of the aisle out to oppose it. They're now taking that piece out, and they've offering back up the full Article 7 rewrite. However, the second option is you can also see that they're filing these amendments separately. So there's a separate one on inventory tax, a separate one on government growth, and then there's a separate one of the consolidation of the education and budget stabilization fund. So they may look at breaking it out between 2 and 4 amendments as well.
We're talking with Jason DeCuir from Advantis Consulting, a little bit on how to pick up the pieces after CA2 fell apart at the polls. And, you know, the nonprofits and the religious exemptions, Jason, moving that from constitutional protection to statute, the way that was pitched to say, if you vote yes for CA2, church properties can be taxed immediately. I mean, it was a lie. I mean, I'm not even going to call it misinformation. The way that was posited in the public was it was a complete mischaracterization of what was actually going on. It was infuriating.
Yeah, Brian, you know sometimes how political campaigns go in Louisiana, and you know, particularly when you're talking tax change, it's so complicated, and nobody, not nobody, but a lot of people just don't realize everything that's in there, and they're believing everything that they hear out on the street or, you know, in small rooms and that sort of thing. But the religious stuff was absolutely going to be protected. I just think that the move from Constitution to statute had some people concerned. but the way that it was being described, what was not accurate.
We got Jason DeCuir with Advantage Consulting with us for a couple more minutes this morning as we're talking about opening up the legislative session next week. Let's get to a couple of the tax bills that are going to be in front of this upcoming legislature. I'll start with the inventory tax. How do they pick up? How do they pick up on that front?
So, Darrell Desautel, Representative Desautel, has filed a separate standalone constitutional amendment dealing with inventory, almost a repeat of what they were trying to do in the special session, but breaking it out. And again, this would give local governments the option to phase inventory out either over 1 year or 5 years, and the state would give them basically incentive payments in order to do that. They would also take the inventory tax and move it to statute, and that would allow local governments to reduce the percentage by which inventory could be taxed in a given parish. So basically, you're giving local governments now the ability to control the phase out or the reduction of that tax. Currently, that is protected in the Constitution. It is a protected tax, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so local governments cannot really touch that tax or phase it out, even if they want to, until the Constitution is changed, giving them the power to do it. And then I call it kind of a companion bill to that. Representative Ken Brass, the credit that corporations get for paying the tax was set to expire in 2026. Well, because there's no way for local governments now to phase it out with CA2 failing, he's kind of putting in an extension, if you will, of the credit. It would not start phasing out until 2028, and it would basically phase out at 10% over a year. But that gives, if it doesn't pass, if the constitutional amendment dealing with inventory doesn't pass this section, it gives them another bite at the apple in 2027 before the credit would start to go away. So that's where the discussion is going to be. And I think everyone believes that, look, we got into this together, the tax and the credit. We should get out of it the same way, with the tax phasing out along with the credit phasing out simultaneously.
We got about a minute and a half left, Jason. I do want to revisit the moving the inventory tax to where parishes are individually in control of that. Is there an issue where that could fly in the face of economic development statewide? Like you would have a project on the hook that Susan Bourgeois is bringing in, but the potential site where the project would be could be held up by the parish controlling the inventory tax, as opposed to the state saying, we got you covered.
Yeah, look, I mean, as long as that tax is constitutionally protected, there is not a whole lot that even LED.
That's true. Yeah, you're right.
Can do, but there are ways through what we call pilots, payment in lieu of tax. There are other negotiation tools that can be used. We know that we still have ITEP, industrial tax exemption, that can help mitigate some of the property tax burden. And then there are some other planning techniques that can be used, but the tax in and of itself can't be dealt with by the legislature or any agency unilaterally, as long as it's protected by the Constitution. And that is one of the areas, Brian, that just absolutely sets us back. And I think that's why the legislature is wanting to address it. And tax and inventory moving from state to state is just not a good policy.
No, absolutely. And if you're going to put a carrot on a stick, they got to want the carrot. So this would be a step in the right direction. Next time we talk, the gavel will have been slapped down and the session will be open. He is Jason DeCuir from Advantage Consulting. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, Brian. We look forward to it. Have a good one.
Always. You do the same.